Day 19. The question of canon. The Bible is a single book made up of many books. There are 39 books in the Old Testament and 27 books in the New Testament. Together, these 66 books make up the Christian scriptures. This collection of authoritative books is called the canon, meaning a fixed rule or standard. The question of how we got our present canon is complex, but not impossible to trace. Let's start with the Old Testament. We know that Jesus and the apostles recognized the inspiration of the Hebrew scriptures. We also know that their Hebrew Bible consisted of the 39 books in a different order and sometimes called by different names that make up our Old Testament. For a long time, it was thought that the Council of Jamnia fixed the Old Testament canon. Now scholars believe the canon was already well established and the council less decisive than we once thought. The assortment of books called the Apocrypha, which Roman Catholics include in their Bible, was not included in the Hebrew scriptures, though they were found in the Septuagint. The Church Father Jerome included the Apocrypha in his Latin Vulgate, but he made clear that the books in the Apocrypha belonged to a different class and were not the same as the canonical books. Over time, as copies were made of the Vulgate, Jerome's original distinctions were overlooked, and the Apocrypha came to be seen as equally authoritative. Turning to the New Testament, we find that the early church believed in an expanding canon. While it may seem strange that Jewish Christians added to their scriptures, this was in keeping with their understanding that God had initiated a new covenant with his people. Covenants typically included written texts to testify to the terms of the new arrangement. We can trace the development of this new canonical awareness from Papias at the beginning of the 2nd century to the Muratorian fragments and Origen's writings in the 3rd century, to the list provided by Eusebius in the first part of the 4th century. Although several books were disputed during this period, we shouldn't exaggerate the level of disagreement. None of the 27 books in our New Testament were ever rejected, and no books besides these 27 were ever clearly accepted. Our present canon was accepted in the East with the publication of Athanasius' Festal Letter, and in the West at the Synod of Rome. In 397, the Synod of Carthage formally recognized the biblical canon for the entire church. The idea of a fixed list of books is not a foreign imposition on the Bible. The New Testament canon was always tied to apostolic authority. Apostolicity explains why the canon had to grow and why the canon would eventually be closed. When we see how deliberately Revelation chapter 22 verses 18 through 19 echoes Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 2 and how Revelation concludes like a bookend with rich imagery pulled from Genesis. It's hard not to conclude that John understood his apocalypse as the closing of a canonical revelation. God's inspired word was now tied to this authoritative collection of inspired texts.